friends. It's your teen and tween librarian, Rebecca, and we're back for another episode of Bedtime Stories. This is the 51st episode and therefore not that special. But still, it's going to be a good one. Last episode, we saw poor Axel get lost in the middle of nowhere, not even in the center of the earth, just somewhere in the middle there. And so we're going to find out tonight what happens to him. I hope he's going to be okay. Of course he is. What am I saying? He's remembering this, so that means he makes it out. But how? So let's find out in chapter 27. Chapter 27. Lost and panic-stricken. To describe my despair at that moment would be impossible, for there is no word for it in any human language. I was buried alive, and with the prospect of dying from the tortures of hunger and thirst. Mechanically, I passed my burning hands over the granite floor. How hard and dry the rock seemed to me. But how had I come to leave the course of the stream? For there was no denying that it was no longer there. Now I understood the reason for that strange silence when I had listened for the last time to hear if I could make out any sound from my companions. At the moment when I had set foot on the wrong path, I had obviously failed to notice the absence of the stream. Clearly, there had been a fork in the gallery just then, and I had taken one route, while the Hansbach, obeying the caprices of another slope, had led my companions off into unknown depths. How was I to return? There was no trace of any footsteps, for my feet left no mark on the granite floor. I racked my brains for a solution to this apparently insoluble problem. My position could be summed up in a single word: lost. Yes, lost at a depth which struck me as immeasurable. Those 75 miles of rock seemed to weigh on my shoulders with a terrifying pressure. I felt crushed. I tried to turn my thoughts to things on the surface of the earth, but I was hard put to it to succeed. Hamburg, the house in the Königstrasse, my poor Gräuben. All that world underneath which I had lost my bearings passed rapidly before my terrified memory. I saw again in a vivid hallucination all the incidents of our journey: the sea crossing, Iceland, Mr. Fridriksson, and Sneffels. I told myself that if, in the position in which I found myself, I still retained even the shadow of a hope, that would be a sign of madness, and that the best thing I could do was to despair. After all, what human power could possibly open up those huge arches of rock curving over my head and take me back to the surface? Who could put my feet on the right path and reunite me with my companions? "Oh, Uncle!" I exclaimed in a despairing voice. This was the only word of reproach which came to my lips, for I knew how much the poor man must be suffering while he, in his turn, was looking for me. When I saw that I was beyond all human aid and incapable of doing anything for myself, I thought of appealing to heaven for help. Memories of my childhood, and especially of my mother, whom I had known only in my earliest years, came back to me, and I knelt in fervent prayer, unworthy though I was of being heard by the God to whom I was appealing so late. This recourse to Providence calmed me slightly, and I was able to concentrate all my mental faculties on my situation. My flask was full, and I had food for 3 days, but I could not remain alone longer than that. Should I go up or down? Up, of course, as far as I could go. Like that, I was bound to reach the point where I'd left the stream, at that baleful fork in the road. Then, with the stream at my feet, I might still be able to regain the summit of Sneffels. Why hadn't I thought of that sooner? Here was obviously a chance of reaching safety. The most urgent necessity was therefore to find the Hansbach again. I stood up, and leaning on my iron-shod stick, I started walking back up the gallery. The slope was rather steep. I walked along hopefully and unhesitatingly, knowing that I had no choice. For half an hour I met no obstacle. I tried to recognize my way by the shape of the tunnel, the projection of the certain rocks, and arrangement of the bends, but no distinguishing feature caught my attention, And soon I discovered that this gallery could not bring me back to the fork, for it had come to a dead end. I bumped into an impenetrable wall and fell on the rock floor. I cannot describe the terror and despair which seized upon me then. I lay there aghast. My last hope had just been shattered against the granite wall. Lost in that labyrinth whose winding passages crisscrossed in all directions, I could not hope to find a way out. I was doomed to die the most horrible of deaths. Strange to relate, it occurred to me that if my fossilized remains were found one day, their presence 75 miles below the surface would lead to some earnest scientific speculations. I tried to speak aloud, but only hoarse sounds passed between my dry lips, and I lay there panting for breath. In the midst of this anguish, a new terror took hold of me. My lamp had been damaged in my fall. I had no means of repairing it, and its light was failing and would soon go out. I watched the glow from the electric current gradually fading in the filament of the lamp. A procession of moving shadows passed along the darkening walls. I no longer dared to blink my eyes for fear of losing the slightest glimmer of this fleeting light. Every moment it seemed to me that it was about to vanish and that darkness was closing in on me. Finally, a last gleam flickered in the lamp. I watched it anxiously, concentrating the full power of my eyes on it, as on the last sensation of light which they were ever to experience, till at last it went out, and I was plunged into unfathomable darkness. A terrible cry burst from my lips. On earth, even on the darkest night, light never entirely abdicates its rights. It may be subtle and diffuse, but however little there may be, the eye finally perceives it. Here, there was none. The total darkness made me a blind man in the full meaning of the word. At this point, I lost my head. I stood up with my arms stretched out before me, trying to feel my way. I started dashing haphazardly through the inextricable maze, going downwards all the time, running through the earth's crust like an inhabitant of the subterranean galleries, crying, shouting, yelling, bruising myself on the jagged rocks, falling and getting up again, trying to drink the blood which was running down my face, and constantly expecting to run into some wall and dash my head to pieces. I shall never know where this mad flight took me. After several hours, doubtless utterly exhausted, I fell headlong on the floor and fainted. And that's the end of chapter 27. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to the library's YouTube channel. You can also find out what's happening at the library by visiting us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Or you can always just go to the library's website. I hope to see you again for the next episode of Bedtime Stories. But until then, be well and sleep well.